Hi, my name is Camille, and I will be presenting on the ALDH variant and how it protects against alcohol dependence. Before I begin, I'd like to issue a trigger warning because I will be talking about addiction. So let me start by telling you a little bit about alcohol addiction and these variants. Alcohol use disorder is classified as a medical diagnosis where an individual no longer has control over their alcohol consumption. Children can inherit this trait from their parents and may have a higher risk of developing an unhealthy addiction. Alcohol dehydrogenase 2 has a variant that produces the inactive form of alcohol dehydrogenase and has a protective feature against alcoholism. Alcohol absorption and metabolism in the liver play a role in this. Let's talk about the metabolism and breakdown of ethanol to fully understand how it relates to a person's likelihood of becoming addicted to alcohol. Ethanol generates cancerous compound acetaldehyde. ALDH is the enzyme that helps with acetaldehyde conversion. Toxic acetaldehyde gets converted into harmless acetic acid in individuals who do not have the variant. This is what contributes to less negative side effects and is not protective against alcoholism. In contrast, acetaldehyde is unable to break down in individuals who do contain the variant and instead causes an accumulation of this toxic compound. This leads to more negative side effects and acts as a protecting factor against alcoholism. There are some differences between levels of risk. Let's start with the left column, higher risk. When the protective variant is absent in an individual, they are at a higher risk of becoming addicted to alcohol. This is because they have acetaldehyde breakdown and do not have that protective feature, as mentioned in the previous slide. Let's say we have individual number 1, and when this individual has that first encounter with alcohol, she has less adverse effects, such as nausea and headaches. This person may have more pleasurable outcomes and a better experience with alcohol. That is why she's at a higher risk, because she's more likely to drink again. Moving on to the right column, the reverse is true for those who are at a lower risk and do have that protective variant. Let's say we have individual number 2. In this case, the toxic acetaldehyde compound builds up, and this leads to more adverse events and unpleasurable outcomes like hangovers. This individual is at a lower risk because she is less likely to drink after having a negative experience associated with alcohol. I will discuss various studies where the methods include non-alcoholic males with and without the protective ALDH2 allele who were recruited for genotype sequencing. After consuming alcohol, their ethanol and acetaldehyde levels were measured according to the alcohol response scale, which assesses their sensitivity to alcohol. They used gas and liquid chromatography to evaluate blood levels of both ethanol and acetaldehyde and tested its significance. Increased acetaldehyde concentration in ALDH 2:2 males. To clarify, ALDH 2:2 is the fully protective variant of the gene, and ALDH 1:2 is the partially protective variant, and ALDH 1:1 is the non-mutated gene that offers no protection against alcoholism. This figure shows the blood levels of acetaldehyde concentration and compares the 2 different genotypes after alcohol consumption. Keep in mind that acetaldehyde is the toxic compound that either breaks down and does not lead to side effects, or is unable to break down and therefore builds up and causes those side effects that influences an individual to not want to drink again. In the purple squares, you can see doses of ethanol that was given specifically for the fully protective variant of the gene, ALDH 2:2, which is circled in red. The values circled in blue represent the mean peak acetaldehyde levels. As you can see, at a 0.2 dose of ethanol, the individuals with the variant genotype have 75 micromolar of acetaldehyde in their blood. And when that dose is doubled they have 79 micromolar of acetaldehyde, and at 0.5 grams per kilograms of ethanol, they have 125 micromolar of acetaldehyde. That is a lot of acetaldehyde buildup, especially when you compare that to the lower levels of acetaldehyde in those individuals either without the protective variant or with partial protection. This study found that the peak acetaldehyde concentrations in homozygous ALDH 2-2 are 1.6 to 3.3 times higher than in heterozygous ALDH 1-2 following a low to moderate intake of ethanol. It seems that there's pretty good evidence from the study to suggest that individuals who carry this ALDH 2-2 variant have much higher levels of toxic acetaldehyde in their blood after consuming alcohol. But let's take a look at another one. Acetaldehyde buildup affected by ALDH 1-2. This study talks about ALDH 1-2, a variant that offers partial protection against alcoholism. This figure shows blood acetaldehyde concentrations in non-alcoholics with different ALDH2 allelotypes following different doses of ethanol. The triangles represent individuals with the functional ALDH 1-1 gene at both 0.3 and 0.5 grams per kilograms of ethanol. The squares represent individuals with the ALDH 1-2 variant at those same doses of ethanol. The y-axis shows their blood acetaldehyde levels, and the x-axis shows how these levels change over time. If you look at the graph, you can see that after about 25 minutes, the levels of acetaldehyde in those with the ALDH 1-2 variant at 0.5 grams per kilograms of ethanol, aka the colored in squares, is the highest peak, containing around 83 micromolar of acetaldehyde in their blood. The same allelotype at 0.3 grams per kilograms of ethanol has around 43 micromolar of acetaldehyde in their blood. Compare that to the alleles that do not contain the variant, or ALDH 1-1, all the way at the bottom, with almost no acetaldehyde levels in their blood, likely because it's already been converted into the harmless form. Even after 70 minutes, there was quite a difference in these levels. There is positive correlation. In other words, individuals with the variant allelotype have higher levels of toxic acetaldehyde over time after consuming ethanol. In this graph, there is a 1.8 times higher acetaldehyde levels in the ALDH 1-2 variant group, and almost no acetaldehyde levels in the group without the variant. As a reminder, the more levels of acetaldehyde in the blood for those containing the variant lowers the risk of developing alcohol use disorder. ALDH 1-2 is associated with amplified terrible feelings. The individuals from the same study that I just showed also had their feelings documented. This figure shows terrible feelings overall between ALDH 1-1, which is symbolized by triangles, and the partially protective variant ALDH 1-2, which is symbolized by squares. The y-axis determines terrible feelings overall and is rated 0 through 4, with 0 being the least terrible and 4 being the most terrible. The x-axis shows how these feelings progress over time. As we can see by this graph, ALDH 1-2, shown as these top two lines, has much higher rates of negative feelings compared to ALDH 1-1, shown as these bottom two lines. In other words, individuals with the partially protective variant are more likely to experience terrible feelings overall. This correlates to acetaldehyde blood levels as mentioned earlier. The more toxic acetaldehyde that builds up in the blood, the more terrible a person will feel after consumption of alcohol. This will influence them to become less likely to develop alcohol use disorder. Conclusions and future directions. ALDH2 is a variant of ALDH that is protective against alcohol use disorder. We saw how ethanol metabolism plays a huge role in this protection. Those without the variant have a functional enzyme, ALDH, that can convert toxic acetaldehyde to harmless acetic acid as soon as an individual consumes alcohol. In contrast, those with the ALDH2 variant have a mutated version of this enzyme that can no longer convert toxic acetaldehyde into a non-toxic form. So instead, it just builds up in the blood after a person consumes alcohol. This leads to more terrible feelings overall, and this negative experience is associated with a lower risk of an individual developing an alcohol addiction, because having one of these variants can offer full or partial protection against alcohol addiction. This is important because alcoholism can be inherited and passed on to the next generation. Future directions. There is potential treatment for liver disease, but it's still in clinical trials. Many researchers are devoted to studying the relationship between the gene and its variants before releasing full treatment options. CRISPR is also a promising future therapy for alcohol use disorder. Hypothetically speaking, if an individual were to be treated for alcohol addiction, CRISPR technology can be used to replace the functional enzyme with the ALDH2 variant to alter their ethanol metabolism and protect that individual against alcohol addiction. There are limitations, though. Off-target effects and immune surveillance make it difficult for modified genes to bind to its intended target. Also, we do not know yet how the body will function without the ALDH gene because we aren't sure yet what else it is involved in. Additionally, these studies are still in early development, and more research must be done in order to offer safe and effective treatment options. Regardless of these limitations, there is hope that one day there will be a cure for alcohol addiction. Thank you for listening.